This picture has taken the internet by storm. Just imagine what this dog discovered. Annie was on her way home from work when she noticed a German shepherd standing over a drain, staring into it with an expression of sorrow. Curious, Annie glanced into the drain and saw something that left her speechless. On her way back from work, she had walked past a local store and spotted the dog. Its sleek black coat gleamed under the streetlights, catching her attention. She couldn't help but admire the dog's beauty, but something felt off. The dog's sad, almost pleading eyes were fixed on her as it hovered over the drain. Its sorrowful demeanor tugged at Annie's heart, but she continued on her way home. She figured the dog's owner was probably inside the store and would soon come to take it home. Annie had just finished a long day at work and was eager to relax. She didn't feel she had the energy to stop and check on the dog. Yet, the next day, as she walked along the same street, she saw the dog again. It was still there, standing in the same spot, peering sadly into the drain. This time, Annie was heading to the store to pick up some groceries. As she approached the entrance, the dog's eyes followed her every step. She noticed how its body seemed to stiffen as she walked by. Even as she entered the store, she couldn't help but glance back at the dog through the glass door. It was still fixated on the drain, its expression as heart-wrenching as before. Annie assumed the dog might be hungry and hoped it was waiting for scraps or treats from someone inside the store. But as she observed more closely, a sinking feeling crept in. The dog didn't seem to have an owner. It looked as though it had spent the entire night outside, curled up on the cold pavement. The thought of this poor dog spending the night alone on the cold streets broke Annie's heart. She knew she couldn't just walk away this time. She decided to help, starting with the simplest gesture: feeding it. She hoped to ease its hunger and show it some kindness. While shopping for her groceries, Annie picked up some treats for the dog. They were mostly dried meat, and she was confident it would love them. Wanting to make sure the dog had enough to eat, she bought a generous amount, knowing she couldn't predict when it might get another meal. When she left the store, Annie stepped outside with a bag of treats in her hand. She knelt down a short distance from the dog and carefully set the treats on the ground. Smiling warmly, she encouraged it to eat. For a moment, the dog didn't move. It simply stood there, watching her with cautious eyes. Realizing the dog was still wary, Annie stepped back to give it space. That's when the dog approached the food. But instead of eating, the dog did something completely unexpected. It gently picked up the treats in its mouth, one by one, and carried them over to the drain. To Annie's astonishment, the dog began sliding each piece through the grates, letting them disappear into the darkness below. Annie froze, her eyes wide with shock. What on earth was the dog doing? Why wasn't it eating the food? She couldn't make sense of what she had just witnessed. Then it hit her. She had misunderstood the dog's behavior. It wasn't waiting outside the store for treats or scraps. Instead, it was fixated on something or someone down in the drain. But what could be so important that the dog would ignore its own hunger? Curiosity consumed Annie. Something wasn't right, and she needed answers. She stepped closer to the drain, hoping to get a better look at whatever had captured the dog's attention. But before she could get too close, the dog sprang to its feet and barked sharply. Its entire body was tense, and its stance was unmistakable, a clear warning to stay back. Whatever the dog was protecting, it wasn't about to let anyone come near it. The message was crystal clear. This wasn't just about food. As Annie stared at the dog, she realized it was ready to attack at the slightest provocation. A wave of fear washed over her, and for the first time in her life, she felt genuinely terrified by a dog. When Annie was a child, her relationship with dogs was very different. She had dreamed of having a puppy of her own and begged her mother for months to get one. She imagined endless days of playing and cuddling with a furry companion. But Annie's mother, a single parent struggling to make ends meet, couldn't afford the expenses of caring for a dog. Instead, her mother focused on providing for their basic needs, explaining their financial struggles with gentle patience. Eventually, young Annie came to understand and stopped asking. As she grew older, her longing for a dog faded, replaced by the challenges and responsibilities of adulthood. Yet fate seemed to have other plans. Years later, as an adult, Annie faced one of the most difficult periods of her life. Her mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and the roles in their relationship reversed. Annie became her caregiver, doing everything possible to make her mother's final days peaceful and filled with love, despite the overwhelming pain of knowing their time together was limited. During this time, Annie's own health suffered. She lost a noticeable amount of weight, becoming a shadow of her former self. Financially, she was barely surviving, as every penny of her income went toward her mother's hospital bills. When her mother passed away, Annie was by her side, holding her hand tightly as tears streamed down her face. The grief was unbearable. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly alone in the world. Later that day, Annie returned home from the hospital, her heart weighed down by an indescribable sadness. As she approached her doorstep, she stopped abruptly. Sitting patiently at her door was a dog, abandoned, with fur matted and dirty. Its eyes met hers, and Annie felt a pang in her chest. Those soulful, pleading eyes seemed to be asking her for comfort, for a sense of belonging. It was as if the dog had appeared in her life at that exact moment for a reason. Its ears drooped, and its tail hung low, clear signs of its life as a stray. Annie's initial shock quickly gave way to a swirl of emotions. She wasn't prepared to care for a dog, didn't know anything about their needs, and certainly didn't feel ready to take on the responsibility. Yet, in her sorrowful state, she couldn't find the energy to shoo it away. Instead, she ignored it and stepped inside, leaving the dog alone on her doorstep. That night, sleep didn't come easily for Annie. Her mind was consumed by thoughts of her mother. But as the hours dragged on, a soft, persistent barking outside her house broke through her grief. At first, she tried to ignore it, but the sound grew too insistent to brush aside. Finally, she got up to investigate, following the faint barking to her front door. When she opened it, she was shocked to see the same dog, still sitting there, barking softly. She had assumed it would have moved on, but it hadn't. To make matters worse, the rain had started, and the dog was soaked to the bone. It shivered in the cold, its small frame trembling, and its runny nose told her it was struggling to stay healthy. Seeing the dog in such a pitiful state broke Annie's heart. Guilt washed over her, and without hesitation, she invited the dog inside. It wagged its tail weakly and happily curled up by the fire. Annie grabbed a blanket, gently wrapping it around the dog to keep it warm. For the rest of the night, she sat by the fireplace with her unexpected companion. They didn't share words, but Annie felt an unspoken bond forming. It was as if they were mourning together, bound by shared grief that neither could fully express. The next morning, Annie didn't even consider sending the dog away. It felt like it belonged with her. She decided to name him Comfort, a reflection of what he had already brought to her life. From that day on, Comfort became her shadow, her constant companion. When the time came to bury her mother, Comfort was by her side. Together, they navigated the pain of loss and slowly began to heal. In the days and months that followed, Comfort helped Annie rediscover life. He stayed by her side as she learned to laugh again and rebuild her world. Years passed, and Annie finally felt like she had regained her footing. But then, tragedy struck again. One evening, Annie came home from work expecting to find Comfort waiting inside, tail wagging as usual. Instead, she found him outside, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Confused, she wondered if she had forgotten to lock the gate, something she was always so careful about. Comfort's joyful bark broke her thoughts. His tail wagged furiously as he bounded toward her. Annie's heart swelled with love, and she quickened her pace to meet him. But Comfort couldn't wait. His excitement took over. He darted into the road, unaware of the car speeding around the corner. Annie's world seemed to slow as she watched in horror. The screeching of brakes shattered the silence, but it was too late. Comfort's body lay motionless, his bright, joyful eyes now fixed in a lifeless stare. Annie's scream pierced the air as she ran to him, collapsing to the ground. She cradled his still body in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she sobbed, her voice breaking, "come back to me." But Comfort was gone. In an instant, the dog that had been her source of strength and healing had been taken from her. In the weeks that followed, Annie felt numb, as though she were reliving the grief of losing her mother all over again. Comfort had been her companion through her darkest days, and now, without him, the world seemed unbearably empty. She blamed herself for what had happened, endlessly replaying the moment in her mind. If only she had locked the gate that day, he never would have gotten out. Despite the pain, Annie knew she couldn't stay in that place forever. She reminded herself that neither her mother nor comfort would want her to crumble. Slowly, she began piecing her life back together. She returned to work, though everything felt different. She was functioning, but the joy she once knew was absent. At one point, she considered getting another dog. She thought it might fill the void left by Comfort's absence. But every time she went to the pound, the memories overwhelmed her. Tears would stream down her face, and she'd have to leave. Eventually, Annie promised herself she wouldn't adopt another pet. The thought of forming another bond, only to risk losing it, was too much to bear. She avoided dogs entirely, shielding herself from the possibility of more heartbreak. Now, as she stood on the street staring at the strange dog over the drain, confusion clouded her thoughts. At first, she had assumed it was hungry, but watching it push the treats down the drain left her puzzled. What could possibly be down there? From where she stood, she couldn't see anything. Curiosity gnawed at her, and she knew she needed another way to figure out what was hidden in the drain. As she turned to leave, Annie gave the dog a small wave. It didn't move but stood still, its gaze fixed on her until she was out of sight. Once she was gone, the dog returned its focus to the drain, staring into the darkness below. What the dog didn't realize was that Annie had a plan. Late that night, dressed in black to blend into the shadows, she slipped out of her house and returned to the spot where she'd seen the dog. She hoped it wouldn't be there, giving her a chance to sneak a peek into the drain. But she was wrong. The dog was still standing guard, its unwavering gaze fixed on the grates. As she got closer, it barked ferociously, its deep, sharp growl echoing through the quiet street. Startled and worried about drawing attention, Annie turned on her heels and hurried away. Her mind raced with questions. Why wouldn't the dog leave? What could be so important down there? The mystery only deepened. Determined to figure it out, Annie realized she needed a better strategy. She couldn't just force her way to the drain, not while the dog was so fiercely protective. The only way forward was to earn its trust. She had to become its friend. The very next day, Annie put her plan into action. She decided to name the dog Ninja, inspired by his sleek black fur that gleamed in the sunlight. After work, she went to the store and bought more treats. This time, she approached Ninja with a calm demeanor, setting the food down and watching as he ate some and pushed the rest through the drain. She didn't intervene. Day after day, she repeated this routine. Each time, she called him by his new name, hoping he'd grow familiar with her voice. Slowly but surely, she started to see progress. Within a week, Ninja began to trust her. His tail wagged with excitement when she approached, and his once cautious eyes now gleamed with recognition. When she handed him treats, he allowed her to pet his soft, glossy fur. The bond they were forming was undeniable, though neither of them fully realized it. As the days went on, Ninja's trust grew. Finally, the moment Annie had been waiting for arrived. Ninja allowed her to stand close to the drain without barking or growling. It was her chance to uncover the secret he'd been guarding. Annie knelt over the drain, peering into its depths, but to her frustration, she couldn't make out anything. The darkness was impenetrable, and there wasn't a single visible clue as to what lay below. Annie refused to give up. Dropping to her knees, she lowered her face closer to the drain, ignoring the curious stares from passers-by. People may have thought she was acting strangely, but Annie didn't care. She was determined to uncover what was hidden beneath. Her efforts seemed fruitless at first. There was nothing but darkness. Then, amidst the hum of the traffic around her, she caught the faintest sound. She froze, straining her ears. It was so quiet, she almost missed it. Tilting her head to the side, she pressed her ear closer to the grates. The sound grew clearer, a soft, pitiful meowing. Annie's heart raced. A kitten was trapped down there. Without wasting a second, she grabbed her phone and dialed the fire department, explaining the situation and pleading for their help. To her relief, they arrived in record time. As soon as the fire truck pulled up, Annie rushed to point them toward the drain. The firefighters worked quickly, removing the heavy grate to reveal the hidden depths of the drain. One of them shone a flashlight into the darkness, scanning the space below. After a moment, he looked up and confirmed Annie's suspicions. A kitten was trapped inside. But there was more. The drain was deep, and one of the firefighters had to climb down to reach the kitten. As he handed up the first tiny bundle of fur, Annie's eyes filled with relief. Then another kitten appeared. And another. By the time the firefighter emerged from the drain, there were 6 kittens in total. Annie's jaw dropped in shock. She couldn't believe so many helpless creatures had been stuck down there all this time without anyone noticing. The firemen speculated that the kittens had likely been swept into the drain during heavy rain and had no way to escape. Annie turned to Ninja, her gaze filled with wonder. She finally understood the dog's persistence. Ninja had discovered the kittens and refused to leave them alone. He had shared his treats with them, staying by their side to protect them. It all made sense now. His aggression wasn't hostility. It was defense. Ninja hadn't trusted anyone to care for the kittens as he had. With the kittens safely rescued, Ninja wagged his tail excitedly, leaping and barking with joy. He even tried to lick Annie's feet, his happiness overflowing. Smiling through tears, Annie led him over to where the kittens were being cared for. It was a moment of pure relief and gratitude for both Annie and Ninja. Some of the kittens were weak and needed immediate care, so they were prepped to be transported to the nearest veterinarian. Meanwhile, a small crowd had gathered, taking pictures of Ninja and the rescued kittens. Everyone was amazed by the dog's intelligence and bravery. It was clear that if not for him, the poor kittens might never have been found. While the kittens were whisked away to the vet for treatment, Annie knew exactly what she needed to do next. She couldn't leave Ninja on the streets, not after everything he had done. When she called to him, he eagerly followed her, wagging his tail with excitement. As they walked home together, Annie couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Ninja was the first dog she had brought home since Comfort's passing, and part of her was afraid. Would he like it? Would she be able to care for him the way he deserved? Thankfully, her worries melted away the moment Ninja stepped through the door. He raced around the house, exploring every corner, his excitement infectious. Annie found herself laughing, something she hadn't done so freely in years. Ninja reminded her so much of Comfort, but in his own unique way. Over the following weeks, Ninja became an inseparable part of Annie's life. They ate together, played in the yard, and even slept in the same bed. Annie's heart overflowed with love, and she realized she had found a new companion to share her life with. Determined to make their bond official, she completed all the necessary paperwork and formally adopted Ninja. He was now hers, and the joy he brought into her life was immeasurable. Meanwhile, the kittens had all recovered and were placed in loving homes with families who promised to care for them. The story of Ninja's heroics had spread far and wide, with pictures of the brave dog and his rescued kittens flooding the internet. People couldn't stop talking about his incredible act of kindness. Annie felt a swell of pride every time she saw those photos. Ninja wasn't just her dog, he was a hero who had touched countless hearts. Did this story inspire you? What would you have done in Annie's shoes? Have you ever adopted a dog, or do you dream of having one? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Life can be full of challenges, but moments like these remind us that happiness is always within reach if we keep moving forward. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day.